Is California's future American? Is secession inevitable for the nation's largest state? Let's talk about it. Welcome to the very first virtual Golden State Talk. I'm Paul Thornton, and I'm coming to you from my granny flat. You can call it the Golden State Granny Flat, from my home in Los Angeles County. If you're watching this on YouTube, I'd really appreciate it if you hit like and subscribe below. This video is part of an LA-based journalism nonprofit co-founded by yours truly and Mario Garza, my former boss at the Los Angeles Times opinion page. Without further ado, let's get to the topic at hand. Talk of California's secession or independence, or whatever you want to call it, has been at a rolling boil ever since Donald Trump was first elected president in 2016. Now that it's 2025 and Donald Trump is once again president and sending National Guard troops and active duty military to U.S. cities, that talk is boiling over. With me to talk about it is Joe Mathews, a longtime journalist in Los Angeles and now a columnist at the LA-based Zocalo Public Square, who has written extensively on California independence. His latest book, published in July 2025, is a compilation of his essays on the topic, entitled The U.S. versus Us, Essays from California as it Fights and Leaves America. Hey guys, before we get to the conversation, I just have to let you know that the recording quality isn't really the best. Joe and I were battling some technical issues before our conversation started, but we still managed to have a very enlightening and fun talk anyway. So here you go.
The title of your book kind of says it all about our conversation. I know from talking to you previously that you're not fond of the term secession, but that's just, that term kind of reflects where we are. California is, according to its own constitution, an inseparable part of the United States. But when I was reading your book, I mean, you made it clear that this is kind of our destiny to be something other than part of the United States. What makes you think that about California in particular, and I guess other places, as you mentioned?
I think the book goes to essays that go back almost 10 years. And I think I was pretty skeptical when I was thinking of this as secession or California leaving. There's no, the United States of America, like, many sort of mafias and criminal enterprises, has procedures to enter, but doesn't really have a procedure for a state to leave. You can't go out. So that has sort of been, that sort of stopped me for a while. We're in some ways, a very different kind of country 9 and 10 years ago. But I actually think we may be at a point where we've already kind of been kicked out in this sense. I mean, California joined a deeply flawed United States on September 9th, 1850. And it was a constitutional republic it joined. I mean, it was part of a infamous compromise that allowed some extensions of slavery in parts of the U.S. and reinforced the Fugitive Slave Act and the ugliest piece of legislation. But there's a constitutional republic we're signed up for. I think now, given what's happened this year and Trump, the speed at which we've sort of moved, we've suspended the Constitution in many ways effectively, and moved from what I think the republic is essentially dead. And we're in an authoritarian place now. We're sort of a competitive authoritarian country, as the political scientists call it. The thing we joined no longer exists. So
It exists on paper, though.
Well, lots of things exist on paper. I mean,
sure.
So does my credit card bill. It doesn't mean it always gets paid. We're at a point where, and then I think we're at a point where, and I should let you get in a word here, but I think we're at a point where while we can't really leave under the Constitution there, but we can get kicked out. And I think a lot of the recent actions against California are the Trump administration maybe not sending, an official notice or an embossed invitation saying, you're out of here. You're not a state. You're not really part of this. You're just another piece of our dictatorship. And it's a very different thing. And now actually, I think we're out, but we've not built the structures to be out. We got kicked out before we could leave. I've been to parties like that.
Uh, yeah, I mean, I use the word secession only because that's the term that's been popularized, especially since
Sure, sure.
2016. And in your book, you have very unflattering things to say about that whole Calexit movement, which is not in any way I know what you align with. They were I read they were based in Moscow, but you prefer the term independence. I'm still going to use secession only because on paper, we still have a country. We are still the American constitutional republic. And leaving the United States is, according to Supreme Court case from 1869, I believe it is, it's essentially illegal. It was Abraham Lincoln's operating assumption during the Civil War that secession was illegal, and it was enshrined by the Supreme Court.
You know,
So
it's
that
it's funny. That's a fun. Yes, it was a Texas case. The Texans have always been more eager to leave than we have been. So it's, but yes, that's true. And I think legal scholars up until just a few years ago would say what you just said. When I report now, I don't hear that so clearly. Um,
really that
yeah,
people that experts who know something about this. I mean, I will say I'm about halfway into Erwin Chemerinsky's, the UC Berkeley Law Dean's latest book, and at the start of it, he says that national disillusion or a new constitution or some kind of grudging acceptance of authoritarian. Those are our three options. So this
yeah.
is becoming, I know, more of a mainstream idea in academia. Um,
Well, I'd love to see a new constitution for the United States. That'd be great. But I'm not holding my breath. And when you look around the world, I mean, there are two things to think about around the world when places kind of go authoritarian. They don't go back quickly. It's decades, it's generations that it
or
takes.
there's a cataclysmic war where millions of people die and
Right.
people
And
are
yeah, but we now have a war department for that, right? Um,
Uh,
so the other thing about it is that there are plenty of places that said you can't leave, and yet the number of countries keeps going up, in the world, over 200. People split, and then there's other kinds of splitting. I mean, it's a whole complicated story, but, I spent a lot of time in the Basque Country of Spain, and they're an autonomous region. So is Catalonia. Autonomy is a word that gets used for regions and universities in Latin America. So there are those kinds of deals, and certainly I would say the more serious sort of California independence move, the Independent California Institute, which is run by a sort of former Silicon Valley software person named CC Moran, who's quite learned and quite cautious, and actually doesn't think we're ready for independence, partly because we don't have a strong enough shared state identity, strong enough cultural identity, and
but
wants.
they've articulated some path forward
Yeah, I mean, they're
for where
different
we
paths.
are now.
They find that in polling autonomy, greater autonomy, polls, and now in the current context, you see a lot of conversation about just in recent weeks about soft secession. You sort of you just sort of ignore the things you want to ignore, and you take steps to sort of build alternative structures. I mean, we've seen that. There's been that stuff over years. I mean, California, Oregon, and Washington. And we who knows, we may end up going with them if when we really go, which
I
would be
think the
great. You could
residents of
call
the
the
state
place.
of Jefferson would have something to say about that, though.
Well, I honestly don't. I'm not sure state departure is perfect. I would be fine with. I mean, you would have. I'm not sure I want a new nation so much as I want to be out. You could have a league of city states, a league of metro regions, and then you don't force anyone to go. I don't want to force people to be in a poly that you could do that. So you could, some parts of California could stay in. There are lots of ways to do that, but California, Oregon, Washington just made a sort of deal to replace the vaccine, effectively replace the federal vaccine advisory thing. We've got climate agreements with them. We have trade. We have a compact with those states and and a few others in the West on reproductive rights. A lot of these things are the beginnings of structures. And if we were to be willing to be more aggressive in not sending our money to Washington, which would heighten and escalate the conflict, we could probably use that money to build things up. Plus, there are a lot of unemployed um, federal workers with a lot of expertise and a lot of dismantled federal government things where you could see multiple states, more blue states, coming together to fill structures. So at some level, I wonder sort of if we haven't already sort of left or are well down the road. We just haven't, we didn't, I mean, I think the speed of what's happened this year in terms of the rapid move, the authoritarian consolidation, really strikes people all over the world. People, since I talk to people in democracy and government everywhere, like how fast it's happened. It's sort of shocking. Not the path. Everyone's been on this path, but but Americans, when we do something, we do it fast, even
We
fast.
do it fast, and for all of how objectionable the administration, the presidential administration is acting, and I can cry foul about how this is just so much against the how we think of ourselves as Americans and so forth. Trump is acting, and a lot of judges agree, plenty don't, but he is acting within some kind of constitutional framework.
I
I
don't
mean,
think that's true.
the
I think he's in
you don't
violation
think so?
himself. I think he's not
Yeah.
the president.
Oh, I agree. But I think there are judges out there who will say, yeah, that, I'll find I'll read between the lines of Article 2 and 3 to find something that gives you the authority to send in the Marines to Los Angeles, even though an act like that, absent an insurrection or an invasion,
Right,
is explicitly illegal.
right. But when you send in the Marines, when you send in these things that are supposed to be used against foreign, you're saying Los Angeles is not us. It's a foreign thing. It's not part of the deal. Um, and I think that's the thing. I think the other thing that makes it live for me and where I find I used to I was really I've been always been torn. I'm still torn, right? But I think the thing that made me torn, and David French did a book, "Divided We Fall," I believe it was called a few years ago. Now in New York, before he was a New York Times columnist, and he actually laid out scenarios and predicted that either California or Texas would leave and occasion a further breakup of the country. And he was arguing against that because it was bad for the world, that that breakup would weaken freedom and democracy around the world. I mean, he's writing this book, 7 years ago. Um, and in that context, right, you think, yeah, the US is a place that stands up for democracy, that backs up the free world and stands up against autocrats. Um, but that reason's gone. We're
Yeah.
aligned with Putin. Our administration is aligned with autocrats around the world. It's putting 50% tariffs on Brazil because Brazil is trying to put the president who issued a presidential coup in prison. We're not on the right side of that. So it may be that a weaker United States is better for the world now. And there are these other things you think you miss. Well, how are we going to do the military? How are we going to have the defense of the military? I used to think, but now the military is being used against us. I mean, the sort of list goes on. You say, what about the massive social safety net you get in a country of 330 million? Well, now that's being dismantled and in question. They got into our social security, for God's sakes. I mean, all these
And they
sorts of
have our
things.
data.
Yeah, right. Free trade and our access to markers and reserve currency, that's being blown up. So at some level, I mean, I used to think it bad for the world, if we left, but now I don't know that that's so much the case. But there's even a bigger issue because now the country is no longer a republic. The thing we joined isn't there. I mean, California is a special place, and it because it's different, it's exceptional. It's people are free, and sometimes we use that freedom to create amazing world-changing things, and sometimes we use that freedom in very poor ways. But that's the essence of who we are. I don't think California can be California within an authoritarian country. I mean, If you want to stay in the country, then you don't have a California anymore, at least not any kind of California that's recognized. So getting out is essentially just self-preservation, you know?
Or
I
there
mean,
might be large sections of Assemblyman, the Assembly Republican leader, James Gallagher. He recently suggested some kind of two-state solution
yeah.
for California.
Well, there are
Um,
hundreds of those ideas over the years.
sure.
And I like that he raised it. I mean, I think those questions are worth having. I mean,
I mean, it
there
was
are,
tongue in cheek. I think it was
well,
clearly.
yeah, I mean,
You
there
don't
are
think so?
you know, I didn't like when Democrats mocked or criticized Mr. Gallagher, Senate member Gallagher, for his idea. I would have actually wanted to talk about trade. You know, if you can, if you can convince national Republicans, um, you know, to sign off on us departing and do it official and peaceful, I'd be happy to talk about leaving some parts of California behind if in the US if they vote for it, just so you let us go.
Well,
I'm
you remember
willing.
San Bernardino a few years ago.
Yeah, well, San Bernardino I thought didn't go strong enough. I mean,
Mm.
I come from a lot of San Bernardino people. Those Scots Irish Okies ended up.
Just to clarify, San Bernardino, it was the board of supervisors there.
Yeah, it's the county, not the city,
the,
not the
the
city.
county, yeah,
Yeah, the
they,
city
which
would
is
be
a
too poor to go off.
massive
They wanted to be
county.
their own state. I
Yes.
thought that was that lacked ambition. I mean, as from a whole, I thought San Bernardino could make a case to be its own country. It certainly has
Mm.
the size. It's the
It's
one of
huge.
the largest county,
Mhm.
and it's very the culture is very different out there. So, um,
Well, I want to get to your vision of what is, I guess, the maybe the proper state size, because it's not necessarily California, but on the point of soft secession, that seems to me that you're saying, well, there are facts on the ground.
yeah,
Um, the government is acting, the federal government, excuse me, is acting as an authoritarian. And you mentioned something before. This certainly wouldn't be a fact on the ground or a soft secession. It would be an overt secession. Would
yeah.
be if we annoyed Donald Trump enough to where he would essentially invite California to leave, because that's the one of the scenarios that's talked about is, well, no president would ever allow California to leave. But if we annoy Donald Trump enough, is that a strategy?
I think that's a fair strategy. I mean, I think we're pretty much on that path.
Mm,
Um, I think we do stronger things. There is I mean, soft secession is sort of you just kind of ignore the things you want to ignore. Um, there's also, I think, a stronger version of that is a real term from history where we go once again to the British Isles. Irish democracy was a
mhm,
thing 100 years ago. 1918, when Sinn Féin won an election, um, rather than sort of send delegates to London, to Westminster, it it created a parliament of its own. It just went out and
mhm.
created a parliament of its own and imposed its own rules and just sort of imposed its democracy without without law, without anything. I mean, you could just start sort of setting up the country and
Sorry,
then
imposed
I
its
mean, obviously
democracy.
the rest of the story goes off. In 1922 you get the Irish Free State, but then there's a civil war between the
Hmm.
Irish that gets pretty ugly and in some sense continues to this day in Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I mean, these can be scary things. We don't have the strong sectarian divide of Catholic Protestant, but the notion of you just go out and do it. I mean, in California, that's what you do. Do you wait to ask permission of the incumbent company, or do you just do a startup to disrupt and you know? I mean, damn
Yeah.
the intellectual property, of us journalists.
Well,
Grab it
it's
all,
funny.
people.
It's funny you should mention the startup model, because something that I worry about, actually, the move fast and break things kind of thing. Um, I kind of worry about the one of the largest, most powerful countries in the world if California were to leave.
Mhm.
And I mean, I'm talking about California, the discrete body of California leaving, even though that may not be actually what happens, and we'll get into that later. But say California were to leave, you would consign 290 million people to essentially permanent Republican rule. I mean, there are a lot of oppressed people in parts of the state or parts of the country that would I don't know. I really I am concerned about people living without hope in places like Florida, Mississippi, Louisiana, and so forth, and Texas if California leaves.
Well, I guess I would say two things about that. I mean, first off, I'm not a Democrat or a Republican. I'm a really a truly
Neither am
unemployed
I.
person. I've covered both, and I don't see Democrats as being a party that is very good at protecting as well. Better, I don't see either party
Yeah,
as
in
actually
this
being
environment though,
pro-democracy. There's
the
not really
Democratic
a
Party
commitment to
is
democracy on either side. I mean, I think
I
it's
have to push back. I have to push back a little bit because given the current situation where we are right now, I mean, I think there's clearly one party that is just unacceptably authoritarian. I agree. I'm not a registered Democrat,
right.
but I feel much more comfortable with the Democrat having all the constitutional authority of the executive branch than a Republican right now.
You know,
And only because a Republican is in total thrall
I
to Donald Trump.
I partly agree with that. I've certainly given I mean, I have more California social values.
Yeah.
Um, but I would say it's very interesting to me that um, the focus of Democrats has been electoral, even now with Prop 50, the gerrymander. You know, it's not that Democrats are trying to put their bodies in the way or, you know, they're not going off to try to arrest or investigate all these mass secret police on the streets to document or hold them to account. Not taking a lot of, I mean, they're going to court, you know, which is nice, but they're not really putting their bodies in front of stopping this. What they're focused on is winning power. You know, they've gone along with the system. They seem to be focused on winning back power in this now authoritarian system, you know, and talk sometimes fairly openly about how they want to use that authoritarianism as well. I've seen authoritarianism around this world from the left and the right, and while you know, I just I don't want either. And I
Yeah, I
and I don't
no.
see I mean, it makes me nervous. One thing that makes me nervous about a California breakup is that we would start being sort of all Democrats. I don't think that depending how we designed, you know, what our borders were, how we designed a government, we might have a greater mix if we moved away from kind of two party systems to more proportional systems where there were multi parties and people really had to talk
Yeah.
to each other more. That's, I mean, that to me is another virtue of a California or a California and friends. If there were a new government, is it gives you a chance to refound, to start a second American republic, you know, but using the best, not a late 18th century political technology, but what we know much more in the 21st century to build something, you know, that, you know, with where we know much more about science, environment,
Hmm.
ecology, the tech. I mean, there's an opportunity to do it. I mean, you know, it could be that you think that the rest will go on, but once if we have a separate republic and people see it works better, they might start to look like us. I mean,
So
yeah,
the dominoes might
our biggest
fall.
problem might be immigration. You know, well, too being many Americans trying to get into California, where
But
are we
there's no
gonna put
place to
all of
live
them? We don't
here.
have enough housing already. You
Oh,
know?
this actually, you've hit on one of my sore points about California. Gavin Newsom going around marketing California as his haven for reproductive freedom, but there's no place for people to seek shelter here if they
Yeah,
come here to
yeah.
exercise their reproductive rights. It absolutely drives me nuts.
Yeah, and there's
That
also, I mean,
said,
we don't our health infrastructure in rural areas is not what it should be.
nope.
Though you look at the maternal like care,
Hmm.
it's really hard to get in places that I visit. No, I completely agree. I think there's another issue with California, and that where we're some ways we have some of the problems of the U.S. and we put more and more power in the executive, the United States and the president, us and the governor. That's not healthy. That's dangerous. We've tilted more authoritarian. Um,
Is
and
that a function of Prop 13 of local governments kind of ceding their authority
yeah,
to the
it is.
state
It
just
is. I
because
mean,
they're not allowed to tax that like they
it,
used to?
That's a big part of it. We built so much structure on Prop 13. Prop 13 is the foundation, but there's lots of things on it, that are there both because Democrats like them and usually interest groups, unions like them. We sort of have a lot of formulas and structure, and we don't want to let localities govern it. But our localities have a lot of, have a lot of Californians in them, and if they had more power, they would be better fixed to solve a lot of these big problems the 21st century is throwing at them. To be able to really tackle climate at a local level, you need a lot more agency, resources, skilled personnel, also better democracy to get your people bought in. Um, and also, defense. If the federal government's going to attack you, our cities are, it's not that Trump is not in large sense attacking an entire state. He's picking off pieces. He's often going after cities, right?
He came for Los Angeles first.
Right. He came to Los Angeles first. He didn't attack all of California at first.
Nope.
Right. So it's easier to pick off the cities if the cities were stronger.
Do you think Proposition 50, the redistricting, the kind of tit for tat response to Texas and California, where essentially our districts, which are currently drawn by an independent redistricting commission, to remove any overt political influence, unlike a lot of other states, that would now change for the next few years if Texas does it. Well, Texas is doing it to essentially a politically gerrymandered map. In California is 54 is it 54 or 52 congressional districts? It's a lot.
Yeah, it is. I think we're
anyway,
but we're going to go down.
Are you saying that that's an I'm just trying? Is that an authoritarian response in your view to the federal authoritarianism?
It's an anti-democratic one.
An anti-democratic.
And it's the ruling party changing the rules and doing it. Because it's California, they're making a point of, well, we're giving it to the people, so it's the people choosing whether to do this. I would slightly undercut that by saying they would have done it without the people if they could, but the California Constitution, once you've done something by vote of the people or put in the Constitution, and both are true of how the redistricting commissions came to be in 2008 and 2010, you have to go back to the people again. So they really had to. If they hadn't gone back to the people, it's likely the thing could have been thrown out in court. So they're making a political virtue of necessity. I don't care a huge amount of it, but I do think it would be, if it were me, I do think grace in fighting authoritarianism is kind of the gangster move. Like, I would have actually gone the other way. Right now, if you're arguing for democracy versus authoritarianism, the way to counter Texas is not to do what Texas did. It's to say, look, in our current system, even though we do it as fairly as you can, just because of the nature of single member districts and where people live in our state, the percentage that Democrats get is, well over 3/4 in some cases, 3/4 or more of representation. But yet, Democrats are only about 60, a little bit more than 60% of the votes. Like, I would go to a proportional representation system and I would say, see, we're really believers in democracy. We're going to give Republicans more here while you were doing it there. Now, I think people would say that's crazy. That's beyond unilateral disarmament.
I think I would say that, Joe. I'm sorry.
But there would be a way to split it. So what they did is they're changing the maps only on the seats in Congress, right? Because everyone's got Congress. So
it's not for
but
state.
If they had done
that
in conjunction with a switch to proportional representation for the legislature, that would have been a major statement about what kind of place. It says to Republicans, you might be better off here. You might be better off here with people who actually respect democracy.
I had this experience pretty early on in the second Trump presidency. I threw my kids in the car about a month after I didn't actually throw them for anyone else who's watching. I put the kids in our minivan and we drove to Colorado. We drove across this country. And I thought every time I crossed a state line, I had, for the first time in my life, an emotional reaction to leaving California, to entering another state. And I just thought, if this country fails, what I'm doing right now is is might be the last time I do something like this.
Yeah.
Where and the thing is though, is that these places that I traveled, um, there was one guy, I was in Nevada. He asked me where you're from. I said Los Angeles, and he reacted very coldly to me as if I
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
someone on an old Soviet passport in the 1980s. Um,
Yeah.
so it was at once kind of a lamentation for what we're losing as a country, this big country where we can all go wherever the hell we want. But also it was kind of an eye-opening experience to be looked at as almost like a refugee. um,
I think, yeah, I think this is a, that's a very,
so I'm mourning.
it's,
I'm
it's
mourning
interesting
in
what
a
you say.
way.
I think what's so unsettling and to me, and I do visit America. I'm glad I don't live there. But
Oh, that's so you're already in the frame of mind where you don't
uh,
live in America anymore.
yeah, yeah.
I see.
But I think what's unsettling to me is, as someone who's written a lot about California and books and the like, is Californians, we're the crazy people. We're supposed to be the crazy people. We're the exception, the people who go too fast and try, what was the McWilliams line, the Carrie McWilliams line? It's like, perilous remedies for present circumstances. We're the crazy folks. What I find so unsettling about this moment in these recent years is that we're becoming like the sane ones in the larger United States picture. They're off their rockers. They're the ones taking all this, I mean, taking this hegemonic, you know, richest country, all these things that they've decided to put at risk to blow up. They're the crazy ones. It feels like national suicide. And I don't, as a Californian, I don't have a lot of practice of telling people to, to calm down, to be cautious. I mean, that's not our bag, right? But like, when we're the same people, you just sort of have to think maybe we need, to, step away from this. I mean, it's this weird spinning around. The way they sort of cosplay their craziness, they go far beyond anything we ever did.
I actually have an anecdote that relates to my time at the LA Times. In about 10 years ago, when I first started editing the letters page, I wrote this small piece on how, if you're going to write a letter saying that there's no evidence for climate change, well, you're stating a falsehood, and we don't publish falsehoods. So that kind of
Yeah.
stuff doesn't get published. And that blew up into this whole controversy,
Yeah.
both within the LA Times and uh, outside. I got a whole lot of emails, some more threatening than others. But one thing that a lot of people who disagreed with me cited was that, oh, well, are you going to ban vaccine skeptical letters next? Because conservatives, we love our vaccines, and it's you crazy liberals out in California who are undermining vaccines. And at the time, that was correct. We had these pockets of communities where measles was skyrocketing. In many ways, we're ground zero for the original anti-vaccine movement. And just in the last few weeks, Gavin Newsom and the other governors of the Western mainland states
Yeah.
created an alliance to defend our access to vaccines.
And we're not that sane, which, finds it more, it's unsettling that they're outdoing us in this area. And we should also concede that the Secretary of Health and Human Services, U.S., is Robert Kennedy Jr., is a resident of Los Angeles.
You're talking about power devolving
Yes.
to California. Well, what happens once California, or something like California, some sort of alliance with the Western states, or James Gallagher's two-state solution, California, coastal California, what obviously you're concerned about direct democracy, local democracy, the best way for people to govern themselves.
Yeah.
Does power further devolve below the
I would,
state level?
I would hope so. I would much
Yeah.
rather be a citizen of sort of a city state, which was actually the way a lot of human society went for many hundreds of years. Cities last longer than nations, right? And
Rome.
I mean, LA is 8 years older than the U.S. Constitution. We just had our 244th birthday, so
Right.
1781. So this metro regions in the world are essentially how the world is really governed and organized, and where we belong. So I could see like a breakaway being, and particularly not to take away conservative places that may want to stay in the U.S. I don't think you can say in one hand we want to be sovereign, we want to have our own system, and force big pieces to come with you in that case. But I think a league of metro regions and cities that wanted to break off. So you have San Diego and greater Los Angeles and the Bay Area and Portland and Seattle
Hmm.
and maybe a few others, and Fresno's getting more lefty. Maybe some of Fresno wants to go where we're moving toward in the future. When I think you could see it in if like a sort of if we had a West Coast kind of a cow. I want to call the country cow, California, Oregon, Washington, cow. Which acknowledges the guys making the dairies making pizza cheese in Hanford or Kings County, and the beef cattle guys in Oregon's Willamette Valley, and then where's it Pasco where they make the all in Washington where they have the big butter
Oh, in
factories.
inland Washington,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, the big butter factories,
Sure.
the cow in that sense. But um, I think
Hey, I'm a
ultimately,
vegetarian, so I don't have much use for,
yeah,
I would keep one as a pet.
I think the possibility of a second American Republic, a different breaking off, if we can do it peacefully, and get at it, offers a lot of hope, for new kinds of ways and systems in the world. And I think, you know, California, Oregon, Washington also are very globally planetary oriented companies. We collaborate well. We'd be a bridge between Canada and Mexico. We'd stop the rest of the U.S. from being a Pacific nation. I mean,
Yeah,
they can't get along with the Koreans or the Japanese. I mean, come on, let us handle that.
you
Um,
know, I it's an interesting possibility only because, I'm a lifelong Californian.
yeah.
My mother's family's, from Norway. They've been here since the mid-50s, and I just sorry to make it about me for a
Yeah, that's
second, but
fine.
I was born in Alameda County, and for most of my life I've lived in LA. So I've lived in sort of both poles of California, both economic poles of California. And I've never seen this state as logically making that much sense geographically to some extent. No, I mean,
Yeah.
Los Angeles, San Diego is cut off from Los Angeles. You have some rugged mountains. You have Camp Pendleton, which is, the only thing stopping development between here and
Mhm.
San Diego. Los Angeles is hemmed in by some of the most rugged mountain ranges,
Sure.
in the country, if not the world. There's the Central Valley, which is its own, has within itself distinct regions. The Bay Area is pretty geographically isolated. I mean, there's so much about California that doesn't make sense. So I see if we're talking about the devolution of power to the states, I just think it's inevitable that that Southern California, Northern California, or any other sort of discrete democratic body would kind of raise its hand and say, "Hey, why not us?"
I think
Um,
there's something to that, and I mean, those regions have some ecological watershed. I mean, certainly Central Valley is about two rivers that come together and meet in a delta, um, and yeah, I mean, I
but
think
there is the federal water project there too. So
yeah, yeah, no, I know, and
there's just so much to unwind.
right, right, which is a great thing. But now we have a president who actually tried to drown people by turning on water at an incredibly
Oh, I
fast
know.
rate, and he thinks that the water connects up to Oregon and Washington. If only,
Some
if
valve,
only.
a high elevation valve.
I think the one last thing I would say, I mean, we're talking about positive. I think that moving on beyond this authoritarian republic gives us it's many new challenges and many difficulties, but also real hope. I'm struck by how negative Californians, Americans, children. I'm a baseball coach, spend time with them, are about the future. I don't see that so much in a lot of other countries I'm in, and I don't think that's realistic. I think we're way too negative about the future. But if we're gonna stick with authoritarianism and this sort of dying republic too long, that's
Climate
yeah,
change,
then I think
yeah,
we're then
affordability.
but
It's
there are massive opportunities. We know so much more about we can see so much more of the things around us. And that is if harnessed in wise governance, can be really good. I mean, I envy. I always tell the kids I coach, I envy you. I do think I do think we'll go in this direction. It just makes too much sense, and it is the positive way.
So we're the broad framework that I guess I'm sensing is that for us to talk about the future with hope, we need to set aside the framework that the United States will exist as it currently is right now. That California will be, as our state constitution says, an inseparable part of the union. If you get rid of that framework, then
Well,
there's hope, or
yeah,
you can start thinking of possibilities that were closed off
right. I mean, I
before.
don't think we're going to lift California up and move it someplace else on like one of those big flatbed trucks.
Yeah.
We will be connected. I mean, at some point, on the land. And I ultimately think, there's a better chance than people think is a violent country, but I think there's a better chance that people think of peaceful divorce, and it probably won't be a full divorce.
Okay.
But
So can you game
we
out
are
the
we
next
are
50
experiencing
years?
what the lawyers called constructive abandonment in marriage situations, where one spouse is abandoning the others. They're not doing their marital things like being around and bringing in money and and making love and other things that can be constructive abandonment. We're being constructively abandoned here. Uh,
The United States is quiet
so
quitting California.
yeah, so they're divorcing us basically. You know,
So what does the next 50 years look like? I
God,
mean, is there I know that your book kind of gets these conversations started. We start seriously having these conversations. So I mean in Joe Mathews' mind, for example, in the next 50 years, what passport will your kids have as they enter France, the UK, or whatever country that they're trying to visit, or say Nevada, if we have to cross national borders?
you know, I hope the answer to that question is some sort of LA or Southern California passport, maybe with Otani's silhouette on the Shohei Ohtani and the Dodgers on the cover. But I mean, I think we'll be separate in
Hmm.
ways that we'll be doing more self-governing. I mean, that's happening all over the world. Like nation states are locked in more political conflict, including ours, and they're doing less of the governance and sometimes dismantling old things, not building new ones. So all the governance falls to local levels. So I think you'll see more robust, maybe much better governance, perhaps hopefully in league between different metro regions and cities all over the world.
I worry about I have to say just one of the practical things that I worry about, and I think you actually use this terminology in one of your columns, is we're living next to a divorced partner that's nuclear armed, that where an authoritarian will have only more power because California's gone. These are just things that are temporary concerns, but um,
Yeah.
they're the kind of things that people, when you talk about California independence, that like I did with you, that it's a lot of, but what about this? But what about this? However, I do want to ask you some kind of clickbaity question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Okay. You travel a lot. My family is Norwegian. Um, California, is that seen already abroad as something special within the United States? Do people think of you when you talk to your friends abroad as a Californian or as an American or as both?
So I always introduce myself as being from Los Angeles or from California, not from the United States. You know, um, and I will correct people sometimes who call me an American. I'm like, it's accident of birth, just it is. I think we are seen distinctly because we've been in this fight. I think being in the fight helps us globally. It says, people know that California and the U.S. are not aligned, that we're fighting, and that's good for us. I know the other people, I have some Canadian colleagues who don't understand why we're not fighting harder to divorce, particularly after this guy, where we're still sort of defending the system. They don't like that. I think putting distance from us is helpful to us. So I mean that's the case. So people see that California is something different and special. but also very, very far away. I mean, doing global work sucks. It's so far to get anywhere. That whole continent back you have to cross if you're coming from Europe, and that Pacific is a very large ocean.
Well, that does it for this Golden State Talk. Thank you so much for listening, and thanks especially to Joe Mathews for talking with us. If you'd like to subscribe or find other ways to support us, please visit goldenstatereport.substack.com.